Thanks for joining us. Once again, my name is Mike McLeod. I'm the Director of Member and Business Development for the BC Hotel Association. We're very pleased today to have several guests from the Ministry of Labour to talk to us about the Temporary Foreign Workers Protection Act and the registry that we're coming up on a fairly significant deadline here. So we wanted to make sure we got information out to members and to assist. As a reminder, as all our webinars are, we are recording and we will be sending this copy out later on today in an email communication to all members. But for some reason you have to jump off, it will be recorded. We will have time for questions. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. Please use the chat function at the bottom. The team here from the Ministry of Labour will run through the presentation, including walking through the online tool for the registry. And then we will spend time with questions at the end. We should be done sort of between 45 minutes to an hour. So looking forward to a great presentation. I'd like to introduce our guests today. We have Assistant Deputy Minister of Labour, Danine Leduc. We have John Blakely, who's the Executive Director for Policy and Legislation. We have Kailyn Sherk, who will be running the presentation here in a moment. And I'd like to turn it over to an introduction from the Deputy Minister of Labour, Trevor Hughes. Trevor, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mike and Carissa, for facilitating this for us. And good morning to all of you. I was pleased to be introduced last because the three of my staff colleagues are going to be the ones that will lead you through this presentation. I just wanted to give a very quick welcome to all of you and thank you for participating in advance. We wanted to take you very quickly through the TFW Protection Act and the implications for you in the hotel industry and what it might mean, and the importance of December 15th for you in the context of being able to access the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which is federal. And so I've got a great team, and I really encourage you all to ask questions. There are no dumb questions. Please don't feel silly or uncertain about anything. This is entirely to assist you with knowing what the rules and obligations are. And without further ado, Danine, if you'd like to take it away, and I will quietly disappear into the mist.
Great. Thank you very much, Trevor. Really appreciate it. And welcome everyone again. Thanks so much for having us. So I'm just going to ask Kailyn to load our PowerPoint deck, and we'll start by giving you an overview of sort of what we've been doing and what's new. Now, the BC Hotel Association and lots of your individual members have been so supportive as we have moved to implement the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act that was passed back in 2018. And you can go ahead to the next slide. While we've been implementing it, we've been doing it in phases so that it's manageable and it ensures sort of success as we roll this out. So the first, one of the things that we've been thinking about as we implement this final piece, which is the employer registry, is we really wanted to make sure that we were implementing in a way that was supportive of employers and understood the pandemic context and the important worker protection needs that are arising in this time as well as others. So what you'll see today and what we're going to give you an overview of is the employer registry and the balance that we endeavored to achieve with your help through both worker protection as a key priority and also ease and timeliness for employers to actually go through the process and get a certificate of registration. So we've balanced it with what we think is a pretty quick and easy online form, and we now have over 900 employers already registered. So we're pretty confident that you're going to find this process streamlined on the front end, but there's a robust due diligence process that goes on in the branch on the back end. So it's quick for you, but still worker protective from us. So we'll show you a little bit about what we've built. And again, a thank you for many of your members who put their hand up to walk through an early version of our online form and help us make it better and quick. As part of the implementation, we've really worked closely with both worker representatives and members of the employer and business community, so that we're hoping what we've produced for you is going to be streamlined and easy, and that you'll see some value in going through this process. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague John, who's going to just refresh your memory on the two key pieces of the legislation, and then we'll talk to you in some detail about our new registry. John, over to you.
Thanks, Danine. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, so just very quickly, just a reminder about what the legislation actually does. So it really is framework legislation that has two key parts. One, it establishes a licensing requirement for foreign worker recruiters and the second, a registration requirement for those wishing to hire foreign nationals. So by getting a license or a registration, it is an application process where there are criteria for issuing, refusing, suspending, or canceling a license or a registration. And there is a complaints process where foreign nationals or others could file a complaint against certain practices, prohibited practices that are set out in the legislation. So there's no, the intent is to address situations where foreign workers are vulnerable. There's no registration of individual workers. And as we go through the next couple of slides, I'll elaborate on a couple of those concepts. So can we go over to the next slide? So the recruiter licensing requirement is, I guess, what you could call old news, in the sense that this was the first phase of implementation of the legislation. So this requirement came into place on October 1st, 2019. And just a reminder that this is a license that recruiters must hold. Those recruiters who are operating in British Columbia. Only individuals may hold a license and not a corporation. So there is no fee to obtain a license, but there is a requirement for recruiters to post a $20,000 bond, which could be accessed should there be a complaint or finding of a situation where fees may have been incorrectly applied or something. So there is the bond against which reimbursements could be made if necessary. The licenses are published online and form the Registry of Foreign Worker Recruiters. And this is a searchable registry. So employers wishing to engage a recruiter can search this registry to identify those who are considered to be in good standing with the province. And to date, about 150 recruiter licenses have been issued. Next slide. So this slide actually speaks to what is now new and of particular interest, I'm sure, to many of you on the webinar today. So this is the registration requirement for employers. So some employers will be required to hold a certificate of registration before they will be able to recruit a foreign national for employment. So government has established this registration requirement for employers if they require a labor market impact assessment from the federal government. So what this means in practice basically is if an employer is recruiting someone under the federal temporary foreign worker program, they need to obtain a certificate of registration from the province first. The other stream that will be covered by the employer registration requirement is those who hire through the federal home child care provider or home support worker pilot programs. So there is no fee to obtain a certificate of registration. And unlike the licensing requirement, there's no requirement to post a bond or anything. At the end of the day, employers who hold certificate of registration will be part of or added to the employer registry, which will be online, and Kailyn will speak to a bit more. And the information that will be on the registry will include the business names of the employer who holds the certificate, the date of issuance, the date of expiry, and any terms and conditions for the registration. So that's a very quick overview of the legislation. And at this point, I'd like to hand things back to Danine.
Great, thanks for that, John. Next slide, please. So we mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation that we have implemented the legislation in phases. And so one of the things that we learned from implementing the first phase was for the first year of issuing licenses for foreign worker recruiters, the Director of Employment Standards issued that for 1 year and gave people an opportunity to develop a compliance history with the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Unit. And then upon renewal, if there was good compliance with British Columbia legislation, those licenses could be extended for up to 3 years and issued. So this doesn't have to be an annual event for employers. So for the first year of the employer registry, they are being issued for 1 year. And then once the employers go through a renewal process, they can be issued for up to 3 years if employers continue to want to access those federal programs. So one of the other things we learned from implementing the recruiter registry is the need for ongoing support for participants. So for employers, there will be regularly scheduled webinars. We have built out quite a few resources on the website, and we'll show you some of those resources a little bit later. And there's also a multilingual information line, 1-800 line available to answer any questions that employers may have, and that will provide you with access to very skilled people within Employment Standards branch to quickly answer your questions. And there's even an opportunity to ask a quick question and get a response by text. So we've done a lot in terms of communication channels to make it as easy as possible for employers to get that specific quick answer that they're looking for. And we'll show you how to do that a little bit later. The other thing that we are hearing a lot from employers, so as John mentioned, much the way we did phase 1 with the recruiter registry is we launched it and then had a 90-day coming into force period to give recruiters an opportunity to come into force. And we did the same thing with the employer registry. So it was launched on September the 18th, and employers have had 90 days to become compliant if they want to access those federal programs through the LMIA streams, the Labor Market Impact Assessment streams, and the 2 other federal pilots that John mentioned. And so we're getting close to that deadline now. And so that's the December 15th date that we want to make sure everybody is aware of. We don't want people to be disappointed. If you want to make an LMIA application after December the 15th, you will need to have a certificate of registration in order to access those programs. And so we want to make sure that we're putting this information out there as broadly as possible. Many of your members have already come through and obtained or applied for and obtained a certificate of registration. But if you already have a TFW, we often get asked questions along these lines. Do I need to get a certificate if I've got TFWs already? The answer to that is no, not right now. This is for a going forward process. So the next time you seek to access the federal LMIA stream programs or those 2 pilots, you will need to have a certificate of registration. So other questions we get from employers: how long does this process take? In the early days, it was taking about an average of 4 business days. That's about where we're at right now, 4 business days to process. Our published service targets are a little bit longer, but the branch is doing a good job of turning these around. And that's from full and complete packages. So if you are a large employer with a more complicated compliance history with BC law, your application might take a little bit longer to process because there is a due diligence process that occurs in the branch on every single application. And so the only other question that we really get is, we're not sure if we're going to want a TFW. Should we get a certificate of registration? And we recommend that if you think you're going to need temporary foreign workers through those federal programs in the next year, that you consider making an early application to the registry so that you're not disappointed or delayed, because the federal government won't process your other documents until you've got this. This is a mandatory pre-step now as of December 15th. All right, next slide. So we're going to just quickly, this slide is really just to let you know there are quite a lot of employer supports prepared to make this as easy and quick as possible on your end. We've left our links and 1-800 information line, but I'm now going to turn it over to Kailyn Sherk, our Director of IMIT Management, and she's actually going to show you some of these, where these links go to. And we're going to show you, I think first, Kailyn, let's start with the employer registry that's already available.
Sounds good. Thanks, Danine. So I'm just bringing up here the landing page. So that link that we just had on the previous slide would take you here to this landing page. And from here, you can see we've got three kind of topic areas that we expect most people to be coming to look for. One around registering to hire, so for the employer registry. One is around getting a license as a recruiter, and the third is around that employer and recruiter registry. So clicking into that third option takes you to the landing page for searching for either a list of all registered employers or a list of all licensed recruiters. And again, clicking into the registered business tab, you get taken to the list of active employer registrations. And as Danine and John mentioned, we've got just a summary set of data here against each of those registrations, which is the employer name, including on any carrying on business names that we have for that business, an effective date that the issuance was made, and an expiry date for that issuance, and then whether or not there's any terms and conditions associated with that particular registration. At this point, we've got the list is quite long. As Danine mentioned, we've got over 900 businesses already registered with the province, but you can easily search if you know kind of the name that you're searching for, and that'll search both the legal business name as well as any of the carry-on business names that we have on file to help especially if employees or prospective employees are looking to see if their business is registered. So I'm going to go back to the main landing page quickly here. And the section that we're going to look into today is the Register to Hire Foreign Workers tab. So clicking into that, you get taken to our registration landing page here. And as Danine mentioned, as webinars come up or as other resources are available, we like to highlight them up top as something new. If you're coming to this page, you'll see that there's an education seminar coming up, and you can click in for more information on that. Otherwise, the website is set up to give you as much of the content as you need, most of it which is just covered by Danine and John around who does the registration apply to, what programs are included and what are exempt. Clicking in here will take you directly to the registration, and we'll do that in just a second here. We also provide you a little bit more information around different types of registrations and who's exempt around becoming a registered employer, as well as the reconsideration process if your initial application is not approved. So we do have a process for that if you need to have any of the information reconsidered. And then a link out to that registry that we just showed you. The last bit of data is around, or a bit of information on this page is around the labor market impact assessment and other obligations and rules that you're required to follow as part of a registered employer in the province. And this is similar to what John has mentioned around the requirements there, and it gives you some more resources to dig into as you are interested in. Finally, we have that same set of contact information for getting in touch with the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Unit. We've got an answer, a phone number to call and an email, as well as that 1-800 number with simultaneous translation available in over 140 languages if that's something that you're needing as well. So I'm just going to scroll back up to the top here, and I'm going to click into the Register to Hire Foreign Workers tab. And quickly, we just wanted to, before you start the application, it is a one-time through application, so there's no save and go back. So in order to make sure that you're prepared for that, we wanted to give you what information you're going to be required to give us as part of the application up front, just so that you have everything together before you get started. And just a note that it only takes 15 minutes. It's not a long application. It's pretty straightforward once you get in there, as long as you have all your information ready to go up front. So again, we just, in case you come to this page for the first time or someone else is doing this on your behalf, we give you a quick overview of what the registry is for, who needs to register, and then have a point here where you can jump right in to register. And then a note again around application reviews and refusals, and then the labor market impact assessment. So similar information to what was on the previous page, but more tailored to people who are in the process of or will be applying. So I'm going to click in here to register, and I'm going to get taken into the actual registration form. Up front, we just have a little bit of information generally about how to get some assistance, selecting the right business type, as well as some disclaimers around the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act and the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, under which we're collecting this information. We do ask you a few starting questions to help us tailor the application to your situation. So we do have individuals and households looking to hire foreign workers as live-in caregivers or as nannies. And so that's one of the options here. Otherwise, we have applications for businesses, as I'm sure many of you would be making. If you select business, we then ask you for business type. Again, this helps us tailor the application to ask for appropriate information. If you're a corporation, we're going to be asking for director information. A partnership would be asking for partner information, etc. So for today, I'm going to go through as a corporation. We also have a question around whether or not the business is registered. As part of this project, we did some work to link up with BC registries and pull directly from them any registration number that's been issued for that business as part of the application process, so that we don't have to go out and do a secondary validation with them. We can do that as an integrated part of the application intake. So I'm going to click yes to be able to show you that. We ask you a question about whether you're using a public or private computer. This helps us make sure that your data is kept as secure as possible. We set a little bit of a shorter timeout if you're using a public one, but for today I'm using a private one. And then the last question we ask you is whether or not you're providing accommodation to foreign workers. And this is, again, signaling to us whether or not those workers will be housed as part of the agreement with your hiring. And if you answer yes, we'll ask you for a little bit more information about where those workers will be housed within the application. Otherwise, if you answer no, we won't ask you that question. So for today, I'm going to answer yes to be able to show you that content once we get in the application. And I'm going to get started. So as you can see, that information summary from the front page, I selected that I was a corporation and that I was registered in BC. And I am now seeing that I have a subsection here that's asking me for director information because I said I was a corporation, as well as I have a subsection here that's asking me for accommodation locations because I did indicate on the starting page that I would be providing accommodations to the workers. And as you'll note down at the bottom, we've got our grayed out review and submit button, so we can't submit anything until we complete all of our sections. So I'm going to jump into the first section here. And I'm going to start typing my business name. And as I type, you can see that in the background, my computer wants to try and take over, but in the background, I've got my business name will try to populate based off of the fact that I said that I was a registered corporation. So it'll search through registered corporations and then pull back for me my BC registry number, and then give me a check mark to say that that's been verified using the org book, which is the online integration tool that we have to connect to that BC registry information. So that helps, again, just doing some of the validation up front to say that we've got the right legal business name and we've got the right registry number because we've pulled it right from their system. We ask you next around any other names that the business may be known as. Perhaps you're a 123 company and you're operating under a different name. This helps us connect any other information or documentation that we may have on file, as well as helps on the registry side if we're listing that business for prospective employees to be able to find you based off of what you operate as. We ask you a question around whether or not you possess a valid business license. If yes, we ask for the business license number if applicable, and then ask you to upload a copy of that business license. Because we're a pre-step, that information may be still in progress, or you may be a household or individual and not have a valid business license. That's something that will be a piece of information that we'll look at it, reviewing on the back end when we do our due diligence as part of the review process. I'm just going to select just a generic phone number here. Phone number for the business is required, website is optional, and a mailing address is required. As part of the implementation, we have what's called the BC geocoder. So it allows you, as you start typing your address, it will try and auto-complete that information for you. We wanted to make this as easy as possible on the user side so that you can get through the form quickly and give us the information that we need to do our due diligence on the back end. After entering the mailing address, we ask you the business address. We can use the mailing address, or you can choose to use a different address, depending on how your business is structured. That may be appropriate or not. I'm just going to save and continue using the same address for the mailing address there. So I've got my first section now. I got a green check mark. I've completed it. And so I'm going to move on to the next section, which is the directors section. So for the directors, I'm going to use myself today. We ask first and last name, optional preferred name, depending on how, if we're contacting this person, how they would what they would be used to be referred to as. We also ask a question around pronouns in case we do need to contact that person, or and we want to be able to make sure that we're addressing them in a respectful manner. Email address for directors is optional, but we want to be able to contact them, so whatever is appropriate. Phone number is required in this situation. We expect that we'll be phoning someone if we need to follow up with them, but we do give the option of that email address as well. And then for mailing address, you have the choice of reusing that business mailing address that you entered in on the previous page, again, to help speed the application process along if appropriate, or use a different address as required. So I'm going to use the same address there and save and continue. As part of the application, we do require that you add in all director information. We tried to make it as simple as possible, requiring first and last name and a phone number, and then you can reuse the business address as appropriate. But we do, as part of that, the next question I'm asked is whether or not all directors are listed above. And if not, then I add another director, will take me to that same page, and I can add additional director information. So today I'm going to say that we're a very, very small corporation with just myself as the director, and I'm going to save and continue. So now I've got my 2 check marks, and I'm going to jump into contact person at the business. So because I have entered a person in the system already, when it comes to being the contact person at the business, it gives me the opportunity to reuse that person as being the contact, or choose to use someone else. So today I'm going to use someone else, and I'm going to say that Danine is the contact for the business. We found that this was something that was requested as part of the process, is that the person who was completing the application may not be the person who is the appropriate to ask questions of the business. So this gives you a chance to indicate who should be asked business questions and then who should be asked application questions when we come to that section next. I'm just going to use myself here. And again, just a generic number. And as is the case with the previous section, I can choose to reuse an address, or I can choose to use a different address. So I'm going to choose to use a different address, and I'm typing, and the BC geocoder again tries to autocomplete my address for me as they find in BC. So the geocoder only looks for BC addresses, expecting that a BC business and BC contacts would have a BC address base there. If you need to enter a different address, you can absolutely do that. The geocoder just won't populate the rest of your information for you. So I'm going to save and continue that section there. And now I've got my first 3 sections complete. The next section is the first time that we look at asking about information about the kind of industry of the business. Depending on what you're doing, we've got a selection of lists from the NAICS code lists that we have populated here. So this should be the complete list. So everyone should have an area that they're able to slot into. If you're unsure of where your business would fit, you can click onto the NAICS code list and get taken to the page where you can search by your industry or search by your activities and find the appropriate industry classification. So for today, I'm going to select accommodation and food services, and then you can add a brief description here of the main activities and services you offer. This is a 250 character limit section, so we're not expecting a large description. This just helps us on the back end put that more specific industry code against that business, and it doesn't require you to do that coding here. So I'm just going to put test in for the purpose of the demo today. Save and continue takes us back. And now our next section is on work locations in BC. And because we're doing this application for businesses looking to hire workers in BC, we're only looking at the work locations in BC. We're expecting to have only work locations in BC. And again, I've added a bunch of addresses along the way, or I can choose to use a different address. So for today, I'm going to actually use one of these other addresses that I've included, and then I get a chance to add another address. So if you have a business that has multiple addresses, you can add all of those in this one step and don't need to go back in and do different ones at different times. So I'm just going to say that I only have one for today and hit save and continue here. My next section is accommodation locations. And so because I'd selected at the front that I was going to be providing accommodation as part of the work agreement, I have a section here for accommodation location. And the question, which is the first question around, have you identified any potential locations where you provide accommodation, gets answered to be yes. Because again, the registration is a pre-step to the LMIA process, we understand that the locations may not yet be known for where accommodations may be provided. So this question can still be answered no, and the rest of that information goes away. If you do know the locations, this page allows you to enter those locations, and similarly to work locations, you can enter multiple locations as needed. So you've got the same form there. You can use existing addresses, and then you can add multiple locations as is needed. So I'm just going to collapse that here and say I don't know yet where my workers are going to have accommodations, and that's fine at this step again because it's an early stage, and save and continue. My next section here is the additional details section, and this looks at more information about the hiring and kind of more details around the business, and all of this goes into the due diligence process and the back end. So the first question is around how many employees you currently have. We're not looking for an exact number, so we have kind of brackets in terms of the number of employees. So I'm going to say that I've got a small year-round workforce, and I have quite a large seasonal workforce that I hire for. And so that second question here is how many foreign workers do you intend to employ in the next 12 months? We then ask you what category of occupations you're looking to hire into. And so you can pick again as is appropriate here, depending on the type of work that you're doing. And then again, if you don't know where those occupations would land, we have a reference out to the NOC code list or the National Occupation Classification codes that you can use to go and find where your occupations would be. The next question asks whether or not you've previously hired or registered to hire foreign workers in Canada. And understanding that this is the first time through, this is a very early kind of iteration of this question, and we expect it to change as we go forward and have more information around employers who have registered previously with us. So right now, if you answer yes, we ask you in which Canadian jurisdiction. So you can indicate multiple provinces if you've hired in multiple provinces before, or in just say in British Columbia if you've hired workers here before. We ask you as well whether or not you know where you intend to recruit from. Some of the programs, this is something that you have some option on, and some of the programs you don't. So depending on whether or not this is something that you do know, you can click yes, in which case we'll ask you where, or you can click no, depending on how involved you are in that part of the hiring process. We ask you as well for the WorkSafe registration number. This is indicated as optional, again, because it's early on in the process. So this is a pre-step. This may be something that you're getting simultaneous to this application, and we didn't want to hold up this process with that. If you don't answer this information, that's something that on the back end we'd be checking for and then following up with you on as it gets closer to. As well as we ask you to upload a copy of your clearance letter and have a link out here in case you need any more information on how to get that. As something that's likely not going to apply to anyone on this call is the farm identification number. In agriculture, this is a much more broadly used identifier, but for hotels, I imagine it's not so much appropriate. But we do ask it just generally on all the applications, and that's why it's optional here, as it may not apply. The last two questions help inform where we look for our due diligence proceedings. The first question is around whether or not any of the directors, partners, or owners have ever been subject to a formal insolvency proceeding. If you answer yes, we give you a box here to provide some context and some explanation around that. Obviously, if you answer no, no context is needed. And the next question is around whether or not anyone has been found in non-compliance with any of the following here. And so again, it's a select list. So you can check off the ones that do apply or the ones that don't. And I know that Danine will probably answer any questions that get fielded on the back end on whether or not this immediately prohibits you from being able to get the registration. And the answer is not necessarily, that there's some investigation and some correspondence that goes into that. I'm sure she'll talk about that in a bit. So for now, I'm going to hit save and continue on this page. And you can see we've now got our status 7 of 8 steps complete. And our last section here is the contact person for the application. And this is something that we got a lot of feedback on as to who may be completing this application and who may be able to answer questions on the application. Because I've entered 2 people's information already here, they are provided to me as an option as who may be the appropriate contact, or I can choose someone else. The reason that may be helpful is if you've got, say, legal counsel filling this in on your behalf or someone on your admin team, depending on who's been tasked with this work, this gives you a chance to have that person indicated as a person that we do follow-up questions with right off the start if there's any application questions. So I'm going to use my favorite contact person named contact person. Again, we ask for pronouns as an option to tell us how to respectfully address that person if we need to be in communication with them. And then we ask whether or not they're assisting with the recruitment or hiring of foreign workers. And if yes, this is one of those pieces that signals to us to check to see if this person maybe needs to have a license under the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act as a recruiter. And the pairing of that will be what their relationship is to the business. So if you're hiring and I'm HR for the business, that's, you know, an in-house person you'd expect to have hire foreign workers, and there would be no need for having a recruiter license for that person. On the email, I'm just going to use myself again and a phone number. So for both the contact person for the business and the contact person for the application, we require both an email address and a phone number to help us get in contact with that individual if need be. And finally, mailing address. I've added a whole bunch of addresses throughout the application, and so it allows me to select one of those addresses, or again, use a different address as is appropriate. So I'm going to select to use an existing address and hit save and continue. So now my application is ready for review. As you can see, all my check marks are completed and my review and submit button is now active. So I can click on that and get taken to my summary page. On this page, you can see a summary of all of the information that I've entered into the system so far. So my employer information, my director information, the contact person I've indicated for the business, my activities and services information, work locations. You're not seeing any accommodation locations as I entered that I did not know that information yet, so we don't have any summary information to provide there. And then all the additional details I've answered. And then finally, the contact person for the application. The last step here is to provide a few confirmations around the information that it's true and correct, understanding what that means under the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act, and the just another notification for under FOIPA and the TFWPA about the collection of information. So I'm going to click on those 3 boxes here, and I'm going to hit submit. And once I've hit submit, it'll take me to a final confirmation page around the application information. So this gives me my application number, the date submitted, and then a series of what's next steps. The first is that a confirmation email will be sent to the contact person for this application. I think John's smiling because he can hear my little one in the back asking for some help. The second is that that application will be reviewed by a delegate of the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act, and then where to go for any contact or information that you may need as a follow-up with that. So we've got the 1-800 number there as well as the email address. So that's it. That takes you through the application steps. So I'm going to pass it back over to Danine.
Great. Thank you very much, Kailyn. And so actually, I think Mike was maybe going to do some curating of the questions. I took a quick scan of the chat. I know the first one maybe we could just quickly start with was someone had asked, if I have an LMIA in process, do I need to get a certificate of registration? And the answer is no. If you already have provided your information in your LMIA package, this is a forward-looking obligation that doesn't come into effect until December 15th. So it'll be only for those new applications for December 15th forward.
Great, thanks, Danine. The next question was, why is the ministry requiring these certificates? What was the reason for additional hurdles?
So that's actually a great question, and it gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit about what was happening in BC. So, if you are a foreign worker, foreign national coming here to provide your labor on a temporary basis, you're in quite a vulnerable situation. Those labor market impact assessment and the work permits that come from those, in almost all circumstances, tie you to a specific employer. So, if you're having a bad experience with that employer, if they're engaging in some of the practices that are now prohibited, things like taking your passport or misrepresenting what the opportunity was, it's really difficult for a foreign worker to actually engage the complaint processes and the review processes that exist. So there was some vulnerability there. And, from the employer's perspective, what we heard is there is not a level playing field. If you're a good employer and you're going through the steps and making a real effort to have a good working experience for your temporary labor force who is coming from another country, there's a competitive advantage to the ones who breach the law and do not behave appropriately. And there was some concern that some sectors in British Columbia, for whom temporary foreign workers are an important temporary labor force, were having difficulties accessing people because some of those bad experiences that people had with those few poor employers in British Columbia was impacting negatively those good employers' opportunity to access more foreign labor. So this is really a balancing act. It's about leveling the playing field for those good employers and making sure that there's a level of review and scrutiny, that the employer who wants to access those foreign workers through the temporary foreign worker and federal program streams are actually good employers. They're complying with British Columbia legislation and they're doing what they need to do. And so this certificate of registration is a process that will ensure that due diligence has been undertaken by the province to make sure that this employer who wants to access that program and get foreign workers has a good track record of complying with BC law.
Great, thanks, Danine. We have another question here regarding the application process on the registry. Can we save and jump back later if we don't have all the information handy?
That's actually a great question. So I'm going to let Kailyn answer this one. The short answer is no, it will time out. It's why it was a balance between making people go through a lengthy password and authentication process up front, or keeping it quick and easy, but having this timeout risk. So Kailyn, did you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, Danine's pretty much hit it on the head. You can jump between sections using that. I went in order top to bottom, but you can jump between the section numbers going in and out, but you can actually leave the application and come back into it. As Danine mentioned, we opted for quick and easy over more robust kind of authentication to have people be able to save their information. That said, that's something that we have flagged as being a request for a future development option, especially for renewals when it comes time to redo the application process to help eliminate some of the duplication there.
Great, thank you both of those answers. And just a reminder to everyone on the webinar, please use the chat function to submit any questions. We have time for a few more here. We have one here, business license is not needed in our region. If we have no valid business license, what does this trigger?
So really what it will do is it will trigger a follow-up email or call from the Employment Standards Branch delegate who has that file, and we'll just confirm with you. Now, they know which communities require it for certain businesses and which ones don't, so you may not get the call, but you can be certain that someone will check and see, oh, you haven't provided a business license, why is that? And if they're not sure, they'll pick up the phone and call. So part of the idea is you provide good information up front and the processing will be faster, but the due diligence process will really wants to work with employers and support you going through this process. So it's not like you can put a wrong answer in there and you're not going to get your certificate of registration. There will be a back and forth with the Employment Standards Branch if they have questions to support you going through the application process.
Terrific. Time for a few more questions, so please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen there. Just a reminder that we have recorded this session and it will be sent out a little bit later on today in an email from the BC Hotel Association. It will also be posted on our website under webinars at bcha.com. It looks like we've run the course here on questions. I'd like to thank our presenters, Danine, John, Kailyn, and Trevor Hughes off the top. Really appreciate your time on this. I know it helps answer a lot of questions, and certainly I know you guys are available for support as members are going through this registry. So really appreciate your time. And as mentioned, all of this will be available on the website and email later on today if you had to pop off.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate this.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.